Hi, welcome to the Human Rocket Launch video series. I'm Neil Babcock. The videos in this series will fit into one of three categories. Hype, where Molly and I will share information about our creative projects. Respect, where we'll talk about the art, films, literature, and music that fill us with joy and inspire us. And Learn, where we share our knowledge about creating art and living life. This episode of Human Rocket Launch Learn will focus on the current global pandemic, from the latest novel coronavirus and COVID-19, the disease it causes. Be aware that this is not meant as medical advice. I'm just delivering information from more than a month of COVID-19 research, and I have some conclusions to share. The most important conclusion is that we do not all need to be infected by COVID-19 between now and the time when an effective vaccine is available to everyone. We've all heard about states here in the US and parts of other countries starting to reopen businesses in recent weeks. Government officials say we've reached peaks in many areas and that we can slowly reopen. But in Hokkaido, Japanese officials had to reinstitute the stay-at-home policy after they tried to open and COVID-19 cases went up. The state of Georgia began to open up last week, and already their infection rate is climbing. You probably have friends, neighbors, or family members who either were never concerned about COVID-19 or have taken these gradual reopenings as a sign that everything is going back to normal and we no longer have to worry about coronavirus. They're hugging each other, not wearing any type of protective masks, and are fine with everyone crowding back into schools, movie theaters, and office buildings. Well, I'm here to tell you that those people are wrong. They're endangering all of us, and they're not in the majority. Most Americans agree that it's too early to start reopening society, despite what some government officials are telling us. We understand that there are political motivations behind these reopenings. Motivations like denying unemployment to workers who don't want to return to unsafe workplaces. Motivations like protecting corporations from liability in the future when infected workers or their surviving families try to sue them for negligence. And the reason the majority of us believe it's too soon to start reopening is that it's being done without any significant plans for keeping us safe. In cases where workers are being asked to physically return to their places of employment, when working from home is just as effective, or students are being asked to physically go back to school when they can learn from home, these government officials and corporate officers are asking people to take unnecessary risks with their health and their lives. I understand why people want to believe everything is fine and that it's safe to reopen society. I get it. I miss seeing movies on the big screen and I miss going to concerts. Self-isolation is inconvenient for everyone. For essential workers who work for businesses that aren't properly protecting them, this pandemic presents a difficult choice between earning a living and staying safe. Many of the people in this category simply can't afford to stay home. There is legislation in place that will hopefully help workers who are put in this terrible position, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and the Family and Medical Leave Act. But this pandemic is so new that there are still a lot of unknowns about how much protection they will offer. The first step for anyone who feels you're being asked to work in an unsafe environment is to discuss it with your employer. The ADA encourages this and also states that you don't have to reveal the specifics of any underlying conditions that make COVID-19 even more dangerous for you than for those without underlying conditions. In Germany, they're working on legislation to make working from home a right for all of their citizens. And any caring and reasonable employer anywhere should do everything possible to make working from home a reality. Let's take a step back and examine why everyone should be doing everything we can to avoid being infected by COVID-19. The biggest risk of infection, of course, is death. Those same government officials who are prematurely trying to reopen society will inevitably hit you with statistics comparing COVID-19 deaths to other types of death. The reality is that on average, a real person, a real American, died every 44 seconds last month from COVID-19. And those are just the people who have been counted. One of the more than 67,000 Americans who has died from this disease is Skylar Herbert, a 5-year-old girl in Detroit. She's more than just part of a statistic. and her parents are missing her every day. You should read about Sheena Jones in Missouri, who has lost 8 members of her family to this disease. You can read Twitter thread after Twitter thread from people who have lost children, spouses, siblings, and parents to COVID-19, and try to put yourself in their shoes. These people are not statistics. They are actual human beings. When it comes to the health effects of COVID-19 for those fortunate enough to recover, there are more unknowns than knowns at this point. Most people are aware of the fever, cough, and shortness of breath that can be symptoms of this disease, but new symptoms are being identified all the time. Repeated shaking with chills, muscle pain, headaches, a sore throat, and a new loss of smell and taste are all potential symptoms that doctors and healthcare workers are now looking for. COVID-19 can also affect the eyes, causing a redness that looks like the patient put on red eyeliner. And the latest symptom that I just read about this weekend is being called COVID toes. These are dark lesions on the feet that are normally caused by extreme cold, but are now appearing on COVID-19 patients in warm climates. Even more troubling are the neurological effects that have been associated with COVID-19. In addition to the loss of smell and taste that I mentioned, some patients are experiencing dizziness, confusion, and even brain damage. And these symptoms can appear days before a fever or cough even set in. A patient in Japan experienced seizures. An airline worker in Detroit had a rare form of brain damage that was found on a CT scan. These symptoms have been seen in patients of all ages with no underlying conditions. Strokes are probably the most disturbing health effects of COVID-19, which can of course lead to death. It's a good idea to memorize this BFAST graphic so that you can easily spot the symptoms that can indicate when a loved one has had a stroke. In New Orleans, a man in his 30s who had no underlying conditions was recently diagnosed with an embolism that was brought on by COVID-19. Thankfully, doctors caught it early enough to save his life. In Madrid, blood clots, which can cause strokes and heart attacks, are such a common symptom that doctors are now giving anticoagulants to everyone diagnosed with COVID-19. So keep these health effects and deaths in mind when you think about herd immunity, which occurs when a large enough sector of the population becomes immune to a disease to protect the entire herd. To achieve herd immunity from COVID-19, it's estimated that 70 to 85% of the population would need to be infected with the disease. Without more testing, we really have no idea what percentage of us have been infected already. As of today, just over 2% of Americans have been tested. In areas where antibody tests have been completed for a larger swath of the population, the numbers show an infection rate from around 3% in Santa Clara County, California, to a little over 12% in the state of New York. So to achieve herd immunity without a vaccine, way more people would have to be infected, and many more would have to die. Putting aside questions about the accuracy of antibody tests that are currently available, one of the biggest unknowns about COVID-19 is whether or not people who have recovered from the infection are actually immune, or if they can catch it again. Patients around the world appear to have become reinfected. With more time and better testing, we should know later this year if recovered patients are actually immune and how long that immunity lasts. With other diseases like chickenpox, immunity basically lasts for life. But with diseases like HIV, patients can have high levels of antibodies and not be immune at all. Once a COVID-19 vaccine is developed and available to everybody, which could be anywhere from months to years, there's a possibility that booster shots will be required at regular intervals like we have now with tetanus. So how do we function as a society moving forward if we don't all want to get infected? The World Health Organization has put out guidelines which are linked in the description of this video, along with links for every article I've used as references. I encourage you to read these articles and to do your own research because it's really important. An article on the PBS website about contact tracing puts it this way: in order to box in COVID-19, we need to establish and maintain the 4 corners of that box: testing, isolation, contact tracing, and quarantine. The testing, which we need to do for as many people as possible, includes testing for infection and accurate antibody testing. Once someone tests positive, they need to self-isolate for 14 days or until they test negative for the infection. This is the second corner of the box. This means isolating in a different part of the house from the rest of their families or roommates if at all possible. And many people who test positive will need extra resources to help them through self-isolation. Those resources include financial support, guarantees that they won't lose their jobs while they quarantine, and food and lodging for those who need it for those 2 weeks. If someone who tests positive has already been physically distancing, then they won't have had contact with many other people, so that the third corner of the box, contact tracing, will be easier to accomplish. We'll need at least 300,000 workers just in the United States to notify people who have had contact with those infected to make sure they go into quarantine, the fourth corner of the box. Quarantine requires that the person who had contact with another person who is known to be infected stay isolated from others for 14 days. This doesn't mean someone the infected patient passed on the street, but someone they had several minutes of close contact with. Again, many people who go into quarantine will require the same extra resources as the isolated patients for those 2 weeks. And during that time, they will be asked how they're feeling to determine if they should be tested. But until we have a system in place that can hold all 4 corners of the box, physical distancing and preventative practices need to continue. Washing our hands regularly, and especially after touching infected surfaces, is crucial. If this causes your hands to become cracked and red, you might be allergic to the sodium lauryl sulfate, or SLS, that's in a lot of soaps. I always carry a small bottle of non-SLS soap with me, and that's helped tremendously. And don't touch your face, because the virus can infect you through your eyes, nose, and mouth. Wear a mask if you have to go out in public. If you have caught COVID-19, even if you don't have symptoms, a mask will catch many of those tiny droplets and protect those around you. But don't let the mask give you a false sense of security, and make sure to maintain a physical distance from others. The final precaution I take is to leave packages and groceries isolated for as long as possible, or wipe them down with disinfectant wipes, and then wash your hands again. We have a responsibility as individuals to avoid disinformation that is created in an attempt to convince us to reopen society too quickly, some of which is coming from government officials. We also need to resist good old-fashioned peer pressure from people around us who aren't taking COVID-19 seriously enough. And we need to learn and practice the measures necessary to keep us all safe. There's a lot we still don't know about COVID-19, and new guidance is coming out all the time. For example, new guidelines have increased physical distancing to 13 feet from the previous 6. We also don't know how transmissible this disease is from the aerosolized particles suspended in the air from an infected person. One study has shown that these viral particles can stay in the air for 3 hours or more. The worst chance of infection comes from physically being close to someone with COVID-19. But these other methods of catching it are still possible as far as we know right now. Until the supply of N95 masks allows for everyone to have them, you have to choose if going out with just a cloth mask is worth the risk. You have to decide if your workplace has incorporated the proper safety measures to stop you from getting this disease. If you live in a place like New Zealand or California, then you have stronger, more capable leaders than other parts of the world, and you're getting a better level of support from your government. Until we know more about this disease, and until we all live under better leadership, we will largely be responsible for our own health and well-being during this pandemic. I know this is a lot of information, and I know it's not fun to think about. Future eps of this series will feature more lighthearted topics and focus on the genius and magic of humanity. While I encourage you to continually research this disease and dig into how your specific government officials are handling it, I also encourage you to take a break from it when it feels overwhelming. Make sure to exercise, listen to music and podcasts, watch a variety of comedy shows and movies, work on reconstructing your emotions. Don't feel like you have to always be serious during this serious event in all of our lives. This backdrop is a photo taken in 1994 of the Mission Control Blue Room at what is now called the Armstrong Flight Research Center, named after one of my favorite Neils, Neil Armstrong. When we think about sending astronauts to the moon and launching telescopes into space, It's easy to imagine our government tackling COVID-19. But we'll need to push our leaders to do better and to provide the proper support to help us get through this. And we will get through it if we work together as human beings. Thank you for watching. Stay home and stay safe.